I'm going to be talking to you about the current concepts in ICU sedation and analgesia and highlight some of the new things that have come up in the last couple of years. Now, there have been surveys of patients and they have reported as to what caused a lot of anxiety to them when they were in the ICU and what gave them a lot of stress. And patients reported pain, sleep deprivation, and the presence of tubes in their nose and mouth as the greatest stressors in the intensive care unit. Now, why do we need sedation and analgesia in the intensive care unit? Of course, for humane reasons, right? You're separating your patients from their families, you need to keep them comfortable. An important reason to sedate them is to facilitate mechanical ventilation. Now, when you have a patient with tubes in or an endotracheal tube or other tubes, you don't want them pulling out these tubes, you don't want them to be uncomfortable, you don't want them coughing out. So you need to give adequate sedation to ventilate them. Relieve pain and of course reduction of intracranial hypertension sometimes, and often like in centers where I work for palliative care. Now, we all know that in the intensive care unit, post-surgical patients, trauma patients, all these patients have pain. Patients with pre-existing medical diseases, maybe rheumatoid arthritis, invasive procedures. However, often we must realize that even monitoring and devices, even the catheters, drain, and even routine nursing procedures like suctioning, physiotherapy, etc., also produce pain. And above all, even immobilization in the intensive care unit causes pain. And so every patient in the intensive care unit needs anesthesia. And untreated pain is well established that we know that it causes many adverse events, including endogenous catecholamine activity, myocardial ischemia, hypercoagulability, and untreated pain can cause a lot of other complications. So you have a lot of factors in the intensive care unit that contribute to anxiety, pain, and delirium. And we have various ways and tools of managing this. And in this, you want to keep your patient calm, alert, pain-free, free of pain and anxiety. You don't want him to be dangerously agitated and pulling out tubes, etc. And at the same time, you don't want him to be too oversedated, because we know the patients who are very oversedated, they take longer time to come off the ventilator, they have longer, worse outcome and longer duration of stay in the intensive care unit and in the hospital. So your goal is to give them pain-free comfort and not painful coma. So what are the current strategies for sedation in the intensive care unit? Now, you have to have a patient-focused approach. So it's very important to identify what are the predisposing and precipitating factors for this pain, and also select an analgesic and sedative drug based on the patient's need. It's important to individualize the patient. Now, also remember that your degree of sedation and anxiolysis and analgesia can vary even between patients. It can vary in the same patient over time. For example, when he's routinely ventilated or when he's getting physiotherapy or being weaned, and also during certain procedures. And always remember that you should first focus on analgesia and then sedation. First give the patient pain relief, a bolus of an analgesic, and then sedate him, because it's very difficult. You can assess using a sedation score the level of sedation, but it's difficult to assess the analgesia, pain other than clinical parameters once the patient has been sedated. So before choosing your agent itself, you have to, an important thing is possible predisposing and precipitating factors. Now this is something that's very overlooked. A simple history can tell you some very important things about this patient. A lot of these patients are in chronic pain, especially in centers like ours. They're on very high doses of morphine and they come to the intensive care unit. And you cannot sedate or give them analgesia. You end up knocking them off and giving them a lot of sedation. But the real problem is that they're off their pain medications. A lot of people may be on having psychiatric illnesses and they might be having on certain medications. So this kind of history is very important, because you might just land up over sedating a lot of your patients, but all they've done is they've just missed their medication. So this is very important to consider. Now, delirium. You can't talk about sedation in ICU today without talking about delirium. Delirium is a new buzzword. So what is delirium? Delirium is an acute reversible disorder of attention and cognition. Now, delirium, unlike what most of us think, occurs in almost 60 to 80% of patients who undergo mechanical ventilation. So it's not something that we can overlook. ICU delirium is a predictive of threefold higher reintubation rate and more than 10 additional days. So there's a lot of data to suggest that delirium is bad for you. It increases hospital stay, ICU stay, hospital stay, and even your mortality rates. So an evaluation of sedation today and analgesic use in ICU, patients demonstrated that a dose-related association, lorazepam in one of the recent studies has shown to be an independent predictor of delirium in the ICU. So what is the role of various sedatives? Now, GABA agonists, which we commonly use in the intensive care unit, are very common. I mean, they cause acute cognitive dysfunction. Drugs like benzodiazepines and propofol, continuous infusions of these drugs. Lorazepam, as I mentioned, is an independent risk factor, and it has been shown. Now, newer agents like the alpha-2 agonists, like dexmedetomidine, now they cause less delirium as compared to midazolam and propofol and have a very promising role in the future of intensive care sedation because we are really concerned about delirium in these patients. And even if you go back to the SCCM guideline, practice guideline of 2002, they said all critically ill patients must be monitored for some level of sedation along with delirium. So it's not something new that we're looking at, but we need to look at delirium in the intensive care unit. Now, just like you titrate your inotropes to a blood pressure, even your sedation has to be titrated to some kind of sedation scores. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with a lot of sedation scores. Every day there's a new sedation score coming. But today there isn't enough evidence to say that you must use this sedation score over this sedation score or you must use another sedation score. What the evidence does tell you that yes, just like you use inotropes or you use blood pressure to titrate your inotropes, you definitely must use some kind of a sedation scoring in the intensive care unit, which is easy to teach people and it's easy to reproduce and it's easy for the bedside nurse to assess. So definitely sedation assessment is very important. And surveys, now having said this, surveys have actually indicated that less than 50% of the ICUs actually use some form of assessment of sedation. So this is something important because people are just thinking about, shall I use this scale? Is this scale better? Is this one is more complicated? What's more important is to assess sedation and use some parameter to this thing. There are other methods like bispectral EEG, evoke potentials, etc. But these are all again not very well validated studies. So if you look at the strategies, there's a paper in 2000, and this is actually quite a landmark paper, though it was a single center paper. It was a randomized controlled trial done by Kress. And most of the papers, if you look up sedation, you'll see Kress's name there. And they only had 128 ventilated patients. And what they did is, they had two groups. Now, in the intervention group, they continued the normal sedation infusions. In the control group. And in the intervention group, what they did daily interruption of sedation. That means every morning, they stopped the sedation, they woke up the patient, okay, they stopped it for an interval, assessed his neurological status, and then they sedated him back. So daily the sedation was interrupted. So on one group you had continuous infusions of sedation, and the other group you had daily interruption. And they found that in patients who were receiving mechanical ventilation with daily interruption of sedation, this decreased the duration of mechanical ventilation, and not only that, it also decreased the length of ICU stay. And following this, daily interruption of sedation has become a practice in the intensive care today. A lot of this thing, including the fast hug and various other protocols that we follow in the intensive care unit, involve interrupting the sedation. So every morning you shut off the sedation, wake up the patient, and then you resedate, and this will help you get your patient off the ventilator and the ICU faster. Now they went a step ahead, so we know daily interruption of sedation works. But they also did something which was published in Lancet 2008, and this is a very interesting paper. It's called Awake and Breathing Control Trial. So not only did they want to awaken the patient, they also gave the patient a spontaneous breathing trial. So this is called the ABC trial, and this was a randomized control trial. And unlike the first paper, this was done in 4 centers on 336 patients who were mechanically ventilated. And what they did is they had a spontaneous awakening trial, followed by a spontaneous breathing trial. Of course, there were contraindications for doing this, which I'll just come to. So they made the patient spontaneously breathe as well, and then they put them back on the usual level. So there was one more intervention. You wake up the patient, and you also make him breathe spontaneously daily. Now, this protocol study is also called the Wake Up and Breathe protocol. And what do they do? So patients on mechanical ventilation, they were screened for a spontaneous awakening trial. Now, of course, patients who were they didn't have to have any alcohol withdrawal, no agitation. Paralyzed patients, this was not done on. Or any patient who had myocardial ischemia or anyone who had intracranial pressure, these were contraindicated. Other patients, they would stop the sedation and they would give a spontaneous awakening trial, screen for it, and they would perform the spontaneous awakening trial if they passed the test. And then subsequently they would give a spontaneous breathing trial. They would assess these patients and then allow them to breathe spontaneously. And then if they were fine and they passed the test, they would actually extubate this patient. So it's a very simple intervention. And if this awake and breathing trial, and if you see the chart, I've just highlighted the important outcomes. And this study actually resulted in a significant reduction in the ventilator-free days, the time to discharge from hospital and ICU, and also the 28th mortality. So a simple intervention resulted in a very good outcome. And they concluded that the Wake Up and Breathe protocol results in better outcomes for mechanically ventilated patients in intensive care unit, and the standard current and then standard current approaches of continuously sedating patients. And this should become a routine practice of care. Now, it's okay to say that we should do daily interruption of sedation, but there were also concerns. Okay, I'm interrupting sedation every day, and these patients are getting extubated faster, they're going home faster. But what about the long-term psychological effects of daily interruption of sedation? Is there any role of this? So they carried the same study forward, and this was planned a priori. And what they did is, this trial, again, this is published in 2010 American Journal of Critical Care Medicine, and they actually, a subgroup of those patients in one of the centers, which underwent the daily interruption of sedation, they actually looked at these patients, 180 of them, and they looked for long-term cognitive and psychological outcome in patients who underwent this ABC trial. And they found in this trial that in mechanically ventilated patients in medical ICU with awake and breathe protocol, there were similar cognitive and psychological and functional outcomes in both the groups. So there aren't really any concerns about any long-term effects with daily interruption of sedation and waking up. Now they went one step further. So you stop the sedation, daily interrupt, you make the patients breathe spontaneously. And it is also shown that when a patient is on mechanical ventilation long term, they also have respiratory muscle weakness. And a lot of agents, drugs, aminoglycosides, steroids, a lot of factors contribute to this kind of weakness. So there is a lot of promising data to show that if you give early physiotherapy to patients, you start give them early physiotherapy right when they're on the ventilator in a faster period, there is better recovery of this. So they went one step further. What they did is they did this randomized controlled trial, which is published in Lancet 2009. It was a trial of 104 patients, and what they did is they gave them early exercise and mobilization during periods of daily interruption of sedation, or daily interruption of sedation with therapy as ordered by the primary care team. So one team got this and the other one did not get this. And they found that safe and well tolerated, and this resulted in better functional outcomes at hospital discharge. There was short and less incidence not only of outcome and ventilator-free days, but also less incidence of delirium in those patients who got, who received early physical therapy. Now, there's a very interesting paper in Lancet 2010. I thought I'd just mention for it to you. This is a randomized controlled trial which talks about the role of no sedation in critically ill patients. And here, what they've done, and this was done in 70 patients. Now, in one group, they sedated the patients with propofol and midazolam thereafter with daily interruption until they were awake. Now, in both groups, actually, it's incorrect to call it no sedation because both the groups got morphine for analgesia, and morphine, as we know, is not a very potent sedative, but it also produces some degree of sedation. So calling it a no sedation protocol is not correct. And then they found that those patients who received only morphine, they had shorter duration of stay in the intensive care unit and also 30 days stay in the hospital. And agitated delirium, however, was found more frequently in the patients that got the morphine. So there was some criticism to this. They said that these patients got no sedation, they only got morphine, so they were more awake. So it was much easier to, it was more likely to pick up delirium in these patients. So that has been a, criticism. They said, okay, the no sedation was better outcome, but patients, so what? Patients had more delirium. So they attribute this to the patients being more awake, and that's why delirium was picked up faster. Now, there is a recent article that's just come in print, and this is from Jean-Louis Vincent's unit, and it's called Towards Lesser Sedation in the Intensive Care Unit. And they actually tried to observe what are the current, it was just an observational study, and they tried to see that what are the current practices of sedation in their intensive care unit. And they looked at 335 patients, 142 of whom got sedation, and they found that only 20% of these patients actually received continuous sedative infusions. And self-extubation occurred in 6 patients, but only 1 needed re-intubation, which actually means maybe the other 5 actually it was time for them to be extubated. So minimal use of continuous sedation seems to be feasible without adverse events. So these 2 papers actually go to show you that we're moving towards less and less sedation in the intensive care unit, trying to keep the patients more awake, trying to keep them spontaneously breathing, and giving them early physical therapy. Now, this is just a pilot study of 17 patients, but it's a new concept. Just like we have patient-controlled analgesia, we have patient-controlled sedation now. And this trial was done in just 17 patients using dexmedetomidine. And that's one of the agents where you can have a patient awake and at the same time calm. So I guess it's possible. Otherwise, I can't imagine how a patient-controlled sedation can work, because, you'll end up just pressing a button and falling off to sleep. But they used dexmedetomidine in these patients, and the patients were very happy, and they found themselves very comfortable. The nurses were also very happy with this kind of method. However, this is just an experimental phase. This was just a pilot study, but it's a new concept, and it warrants further investigation. So these are the various kind of ways in which we need to sedate patients. So what about the agents? So if I had to choose an ideal agent, we all use different agents. What would it have? It should provide sedation and pain control. It should preferably be a drug that has rapid onset of action, allows rapid recovery after discontinuation, minimal adverse events, minimal accumulation, which we're concerned about, and overall should not be an expensive drug. So if you look at the current agents that we use in the intensive care unit for sedation and analgesia, we have the benzodiazepines like midazolam and lorazepam that are commonly used, and this will give you amnesia, hypnosis, and anxiolysis, and propofol, of course. For analgesia, largely we use opioids, which will give you analgesia, hypnosis, and anxiolysis, but of course will not produce amnesia. And they also produce other effects like respiratory depression, antidepressives, and there are also complications related to the use of opioids. So if you look at midazolam and lorazepam, and if you compare the two, midazolam is definitely rapidly acting and shorter, shorter duration of action, but has many drug interactions, and it has active metabolites, so they can accumulate. So the concerns are when you give prolonged infusion, because of a larger volume of distribution and being a lipophilic drug, there are concerns about renal and hepatic failure and also delirium. Lorazepam is cheaper and longer half-life. It's better choice in liver failure, but there are concerns about propylene glycol toxicity and independent risk factor for delirium. So there are concerns about using lorazepam as well. If you look at propofol, excellent drug, rapid onset, short acting, and studies have even shown faster extubations with propofol compared to patients who have been on infusions of midazolam. However, it's expensive, there's hypotension, there's concerns about increased serum triglyceride levels, and we all know about propofol infusion syndrome, and for this reason, it's not recommended to be used more than 5 milligram per kg per hour, and they're definitely not more for 48 hours. And if you compare your opioids, you will see that morphine and fentanyl and remifentanil are the commonly used agents in this thing. Morphine is a good agent, cheap, but there are concerns about the metabolites are active, and there are concerns about accumulation in hepatic and renal failure and histamine release. Fentanyl in that sense is much safer to use and is more more cardiostable. Now remifentanil is another very promising drug because of rapid onset of action and the way it is metabolized by the esterases. There is no hepatic and renal accumulation, and it also has a very shorter context-sensitive half-life. So it's a rapid switch on and a rapid switch off, and that makes it a very promising drug. So if you just look at the way the context-sensitive half-life means the time that from when the patient is on a continuous infusion, the time that it takes for the plasma level to reach 50%. So if you see an infusion of alfentanil, you shut it off, and the levels come down, and you shut it off, and it takes further longer time for the levels for it to wear off. Whereas if you look at remifentanil infusion, if there's a continuous infusion, if you see the graph below, it has a very short context-sensitive half-life. So you shut it off, and the effect wears off. It reaches a 50% in just 3 to 4 minutes, and then again you continue the infusion, and you shut it off, and again the patient is awake. So just to compare the context-sensitive half-life, because when you talk about sedation, you need to know this. And remifentanil is a very good drug because both the elimination half-life and the context-sensitive half-life are very short. So in that sense, it's a good agent. However, it's not recommended for more than 3 days of use for continuous infusions. So what is dexmedetomidine? There's a lot of talk about dexmedetomidine. Now, this is a new sedative agent, selective alpha-2 agonist that's was approved till now for less than 24 hours of sedation. Now, if this produces sedation, anxiolysis, analgesia. So it has both sedative and analgesic properties. None of the commonly used sedatives in ICU that we use have analgesic properties. So this is one agent that also has analgesic properties. It does not produce any respiratory depression, more cardiostable, and has minimal side effects. Now the sites of action are in the brain and the locus coeruleus and the CNS. It produces anxiolysis, analgesia, and decreased sympathetic activity, and inhibits the neuronal firing. This thing. And I was very fortunate because we were the first users of dexmedetomidine in the country, and we did a large randomized controlled trial involving Tata Memorial Hospital and Sion Hospital and a few other centers. And dexmedetomidine was not available in India, and we wanted to start using it, so we did this study, and following the results of this randomized controlled trial, today it's got licensing in India, and dexmedetomidine is widely available, and I'm sure most of you have access to this drug. And we compared it with propofol because we thought that was a fair comparison. We needed a drug that would, have a rapid onset and offset of action. So we didn't compare it with midazolam, we compared it with propofol. And what we did is, at that moment when we did the randomized controlled trial, it was only approved for 24-hour sedation. So we selected post-operative patients who were electively ventilated overnight and gave them this product. So one group got propofol and one group got dexmedetomidine. And the propofol group, we gave an initial loading dose of 1 to 2 milligram per kg, and then we followed it up by an infusion. And the maintenance dose was about 1 to 2 milligram per kg per hour. And in the dexmedetomidine group, we gave a bolus of 1 to 2 milligram, microgram per kg. And both groups, the propofol group and the dexmedetomidine group, analgesia was provided by giving boluses of fentanyl, and that was left to the clinician. And if, despite giving dexmedetomidine or propofol, the sedation was inadequate, then the clinician could use rescue boluses of midazolam. So it was quite challenging to do this trial because propofol, as you know, is a white agent and is a high chance for a bias because anyone will know this is a propofol arm. So we had to use specially designed syringes. Not only syringes, but even the tubings were opaque to blind for propofol and dexmedetomidine. And we tried to assess various parameters of sedation, extubation, analgesia, time to recovery, etc. And this was done on 100 patients. I'll just quickly tell you the results. And what we found is that the use of rescue sedation was there on both the arms, of course, or not all the times patients were well sedated with dexmedetomidine either, but there was a significantly lesser number of patients who required rescue sedation in the dexmedetomidine arm. Now, if you look at awakening to extubation, now the total time to extubation in both propofol and dexmedetomidine was the same, but if you look at the time to stopping the infusion to the time to awakening, now there was a significantly lower time that the patients in the dexmedetomidine arm had, 5 minutes versus almost 8.4 minutes for propofol. However, surprisingly, there was no difference in the time to extubation of both the patients. Another very important finding in our study was that there was almost a 50% reduction in the analgesic requirement. So dexmedetomidine is not a very potent analgesic, but it definitely reduces the amount of opioids that you can use. So it also has analgesic properties. And when we looked at safety parameters, etc., they were, on both arms, the patients, there were no major serious events. And there was a similar study that was done, and which was published in British Journal of Anesthesia. And we just tried to compare. It was a small study. It was not powered to answer these questions really. And we found that our patients, the results were pretty similar. It was safe in both the groups. But our patients, the dosages that were used in our patients were a little less as compared to the Western patients, the requirements. So the bolus dose is 1 microgram per kg and the infusion is 0.2 to 0.7. But our patients were well sedated with a range of 0.2 to 0.3 microgram per kg compared to the Western patients. So if you look at the various agents, just to summarize, you don't want a patient agent that will cause prolonged bleeding, respiratory depression, cumulative effects, and delirium. So dexmedetomidine doesn't produce any of these effects. You want something that's rapid onset, patient is easily arousable, and relatively cardiostable, and gives analgesia. So dexmedetomidine has all these properties. However, it doesn't produce amnesia. So it's a promising drug for future use because it has most of the properties that you're looking for in the intensive care unit. Now, when we did this trial, dexmedetomidine was only approved for 24-hour sedation. And there's a recent study, 2009, which is published in JAMA, and this is called the SEDCOM trial. And this was a randomized controlled trial where they compared midazolam infusion with a dexmedetomidine infusion and for longer duration of sedation. And they actually found that patients who were on dexmedetomidine spent less time on the ventilator, and they also had less delirium and less tachycardia and hypotension. Bradycardia, of course, was one of the concerns. So today, after this trial, dexmedetomidine has been licensed for continuous infusions, because otherwise, if it's only used for 24 hours in the ICU, there's not much role for prolonged. So today, you can use prolonged infusions of dexmedetomidine. And another trial that has come is the effect of dexmedetomidine.
You'll have to summarize.
Yeah, just one more slide. Versus lorazepam, and it's also found to be better. Then the other concept is co-sedation or analgosedation. Now, often your analgesic medications are added to sedation infusion. You mix midazolam and fentanyl, and this has shown to reduce the doses of both the agents, and in also some cases increase the efficacy of treatment. I'll just like to end with a recently published trial, and this is called the ABCDE bundle. And this was published by Jackson et al. In Critical Care in 2010. And I'm just putting it up as my last slide because this actually summarizes all the strategies that you need to use when you're using sedation in the intensive care unit. That is, you should do daily awake and breathing coordination of daily sedation and ventilator trials. That means you should do daily interruption of sedation. I'm talking about patients who are on continuous infusions. You should also give them a spontaneous breathing trial. Your choice of sedation or analgesic. Okay, you should consider using dexmedetomidine because it doesn't produce delirium, and you can have a calm patient who's awake and still will tolerate your tube. Delirium monitoring is very important, and you can use any tool, but you should look for delirium in the ICU. And early physiotherapy on a ventilator, an early this thing is required. So we've moved from the first era where we used to paralyze patients to the second era of coma, and the third era is give patients what they want, what they need, pain-free comfort. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Sheila, for an excellent talk on a very common clinical problem which all of us face. Dr. Sheila is very fond of ABCD, so she's added another
But now
ABCD.
it's CAB, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's changed, but those alphabets are there. So now you got another ABCD because it's become CAB now. So very excellent talk on it. And now the house is open for questions. Yeah, please. I was pressing this. Green title, I didn't see it.
If I allow you, it's difficult to get the substitute observation.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a very good point you made, because it's okay to say just interrupt your sedation. Now, it's recommended that you do it in the morning hours. Okay, when there are more people in